Yep, no problems at all. I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you very much for tuning up tonight. We are trying more of these Zoom meetings now to try and disseminate more information to the groups. And this one is quite important because under the FRONZ access agreement to the main line under NRS 11, we're supposed to share knowledge. Okay, so we're grateful to Mainline's team for allowing their report for us to discuss tonight. The best analogy you can make is the TAC reports that most of you see that TAC bring out after an accident. The whole part of the rail industry is that when an incident happens, we all need to learn from it, okay? And this is what FRONZ needs to do, and you all need to do. If you sort of have an accident and you think, or an incident, and you think that other groups could learn from that, it's a really good idea in this sort of forum or in a newsletter or whatever, is passing those findings out to the other groups so they can benefit from it. That's all part of the big, our industry, what we do. So it's just something that we need to have a think about and we need to do. So this is a good example of an incident that luckily wasn't on the main line. It was in a siding, but it all had consequences for all you guys that have plain bearing locomotives, bogies, whatever, you know. So it's all good that you've come tonight to listen into what has to be said and the information that we've found out in the investigation on why this incident happened. So this whole report was really part of the Heritage Technical Committee requirements and Key Rail's requirements to be investigated. So I will now pass on to Mike Anderson. Mike Anderson is chairman of the Heritage Technical Committee, and he'll be able to give us a bit more insight into the incident. Thanks, Mike.
Kia ora, thank you. Kia ora koutou, na mihi nui, kia ora koutou, Paul Marie. I'm Mike, and as Grant said, I'm the current chair of the Heritage Technical Committee. I'm just going to go into some screen share rather than looking at me, just to give those people who are here from groups that aren't network operators some background onto who the hell is this guy and what is the HTC. So I'll just share my screen now. So hopefully you're now looking at our website, and I'd recommend, even if you're not a national network operator, that every now and then you drop into htc.kiwi, which is our website, because we publish our technical standards and incident reports like this one and a whole lot of other information up there. And it's not just for mainline operators, it's for every operator in the country. Only the mainline operators are bound by our rulings, but we just have this website running as a information portal that's freely available to anyone who runs old gear in New Zealand, which most of us are doing. Hopefully that makes sense. So tonight, I don't want to be all about the AB 608 axle failure thing, because this is actually about plain bearings. It's not about the thing that happened with the AB locomotive. Yep. So have most of you, and you don't have to answer now, I'm assuming most of you have read the annotated report that came out into the actual failure on the AB, and have read the focus questions that we asked you, saying, now that we've learned this, what have you thought about? And what I'd like to do is actually just throw it open now rather than me talking from the beginning, and say, has there anything that's occurred to your group when you read those focus questions for self-review that you thought, oh, okay, that's a bit interesting, that's something we've thought about ourselves, and share it with the rest of the team who's online now? So anyone now can just jump in and share that. Paul Markham, stop picking your earwax and look at us. I'm going to invite you to kick off first with a précis of the email that you sent me earlier this week, because that's something that, in your mind, you read the incident report and the focus questions about the AB axle failure, and you had some interesting responses to it. So can you just focus your thoughts a wee bit and talk us through that?
Mike, it's a long time ago I read it. I've had a few sleeps since then. I think really for me, the failure of any bearing comes down to several things. Well, one important thing is lubrication, of course, and in this case, a crown brass in an AB or an A or a UC or an F class loco. It all hinges around the oil getting into the bearing surface, and of course, trimmings, which or some people call them wicks, must be cleaned regularly. I think that's the problem of a lot of failures. By the way, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Right. They get dirty and gummed up, and they need to be taken out and washed in kerosene and dried. And the cellar at the top of the bearing, where the trimmings sit, need to be cleaned out. Need to be sucked out, cleaned out with a rag, whatever. The other thing, of course, is the oil goes towards the journal from the top of the crown brass, and it has a slot at the top for the oil to drip down onto the journal, the axle journal. I talked about this at length with Johnson, the late Johnson Julian. It was one of our pet topics. We had regular phone calls about things like this, and one of the problems is that the slot at the top of the bearing, it's in contact with the journal. A lot of them are too sharp. The corner of them are too sharp. And of course, what it in effect does is wipes the journal clean rather than allowing the oil to get onto the journal and go round and round. And old railway fitters, over the years, I've gleaned information and watched them, and they showed me, and is to chamfer these. So in other words, a 45-degree chamfer, but not nice and smooth or not machined, but rough as. In other words, done with a cold chisel or a rough file or anything, or a disc grinder even. And also at the halfway point of the journal, where basically the crown brass goes to the halfway point of the axle, that they are also can be too sharp, and the chamfering as well. And of course, the other thing is the thrum or the toe underneath the axle, which all the oil will end up in, and that needs to be cleaned occasionally too and kept moist. But anyway, that's just a few things why I think that bearings do fail. The other thing is, sometimes I think locos can go too long without being topped up with oil. That's the other problem. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, Paul, that's a good start, because the purpose of this Zoom meeting isn't to do anything other than to help FRONZ members who operate plain bearings just do some reflection on their own practices. Yeah. There's a whole lot of documentation that gets sent to Waka Kotahi, previously known as NZTA, on a whole lot of things that isn't the most important, dangerous thing within a group. And so one of the main purposes of tonight's meeting is to actually lift the risk of plain bearings up to actually saying, well, if you've got a policy about who holds keys to your workshop, and have you got a policy about a range of other things, if you're looking at real life risks, management of plain bearings, it has to be more heightened than it was before this accident investigation.
Absolutely.
And we're not at this meeting going to tell you what you should do. What we're suggesting is that you have a review with your own management committees and your own organisations and say, gosh, this is something we didn't even know about, perhaps. So under the heading of didn't know about, we may be sitting here thinking we're talking about steam locomotives before the era of roller bearings, but we're actually talking about some of the most modern, in brackets modern, because Kiwi Rail is a heritage rail operator too, up until recent stuff, is that the plain bearings that can cause the same sort of failure that happened on mainline steamed AB exist on diesel electric locomotives, tram cars with traction motors on them, and electric locomotives too. So they're called suspension bearings on traction motors, and that plain bearing is actually wrapped around the axle. So tonight, if you're here and thinking, a little relevance to us, this risk is there for you if you have anything that has a traction motor in it as well.
Yeah.
Anyone got any response or further questioning for Paul?
Yeah, Dennis King here.
Hi, Dennis.
How are you? So one of the other things that I think is pretty important, certainly I'm only experienced on locomotives and AB in particular, is making sure it's being very particular about water in the cellars. So, for instance, if people have been cleaning a locomotive, water blasting it, if it's been stuck in the open for any period of time, it's absolutely important that, from my point of view, that you go around and make sure there is no water in the cellar. This is often, you can often tell there's water in there because there appears to be oil in there, but actually what it is water with oil on top. Water with oil on top of it. And so it's really important you get rid of that, because that means you're not actually getting a feed of any lubrication once that water's in there, or very little. So it's going to be reduced or not at all. I certainly recommend that before any trip or an excursion or anything that's checked. It's something I've found in particular. You'll go in there and you'll find, if the locomotive's been out in the weather at all, that there's likelihood you'll find water in there, and if you don't get rid of it, you're asking for problems.
Yep.
Thank you, Dennis. So around that is something that's occurred as we've been looking into this incident over the last few years, is that whether or not it happened, and it doesn't matter, is that water blasting and pressure washing to clean, particularly around older steam locos, perhaps not the best plan.
That's right.
Well, maybe not the best plan, but if you're going to do it, you need to make sure you check your cellars and get rid of the water, because there's a good chance it'll be in there.
Yeah.
The other place the water can accumulate is actually in the well at the bottom, and the cellar at the bottom rather, and the well at the top. Now it can go down into there as well, where the flax toe is. And one of the problems with the ABs is that there's no way of really getting it out, or an easy way of getting it out, other than if you were to have some sort of bung on the bottom of each side of the cellar that you could undo and let the stuff drain out. But that's another thing that I'm does concern with them, that there's no way of getting that water out easily anyway. But maybe it doesn't matter, because it's really not there. The lubrication is still coming down. It's just what happens in the bottom. Maybe it's not getting picked up by the flax toe as well as it could.
Yeah. So a point coming out of this discussion is, regardless of the size or the scope of your operation, you may want to have a reflect on what's in your safety case and what's in your day-to-day procedures about the stuff that Dennis has just mentioned. Because again, I'm talking about, we've got safety cases and safety systems which have sign-off sheets for who's cleaned the windows and on carriages, but is there something, and I'm not suggesting it's not, but have a think about it for yourself about these risks when water gets sprayed around near plain bearings. Do you have a procedure, and is someone responsible for making sure that it hasn't infiltrated and is going to check for water contamination before movements? And we're not talking about a mainline trip, we're just talking about a trundle up the Weka Pass Railway, which could have equal consequences, or Haru or anywhere else. Thanks, Dennis. Has anyone else got anything to add at this stage from life experience or wonderings they've had since reading the report we circulated?
Just one other thing I found is that you need to check your trimmings are in place. Sometimes they can come out. I've seen that. If you've got no trimming, you're not going to get much lubrication. And usually the trimming you'll find, the locomotive I'm talking about, it's often the axle box liner trimmings that will pop out easier than the actual crown brass ones. But that axle box is doing, on the AB, is doing two things. It's lubricating the journal, and it's also lubricating the liners, horn liners. They're usually just lying around on the top of the well, I've found. If you see them missing, you can usually fish them out and get them back in. But making sure they're all there anyway is probably a good thing to check for.
Cool. Thank you. So something I wanted to make sure that we circulated around for people to think about, and I've sent a YouTube video around, is the phenomenon known as liquid metal embrittlement, or LME. There was a report commissioned by KiwiRail to look at heritage understanding of engineering issues. And one of the big flags that came out of that amongst the mainline operating groups was that there was a general lack of understanding about what that meant and how safety critical it is. So therefore, I'm extrapolating a bit. Maybe it extends into the non-network heritage groups, the Ferrymead Railways, the Wicker Pass, the Waitara, or whatever. So I shared with you a video which simulated LME using gallium on an aluminium drink can, which some of you may have seen. Yeah. So it's a really interesting thing, is that it hasn't been known within our sector. So bearings getting really hot, and you know, it used to be called, it was a colloquial term within not KiwiRail, NZR, called a hot box, you know, a hot box, whatever's happening, you know. But I don't think there was an understanding of the extreme danger that happens from a physics point of view, with science happening about what happens when bearings start to get hot. And if the bearing metal becomes liquid, which I've seen, Nigel Hogg, I see you're there. I remember at, oh, he's run away because I use his name. I remember being a very young guy, 18 years old, helping at Ferrymead 125, when Ferrymead's C-class locomotive 864 was running trips between Littleton and Christchurch as part of that wonderful celebration, and it was having some bearing issues on its front axle, and there was a bearing running hot, and you could tell that because white metal was starting to spray out the side of the thing. So that liquid metal spraying out the side of the thing, if that had touched the axle, it would have caused what you saw on that Coke can in the video, which is an instant, within seconds, embrittlement of an axle, which is suddenly not an axle. And that's what happened with the AB. And salute to Mainline Steam. They paid for a professional metallurgist to do an analysis of what happened with that axle. And that's exactly what happened, is that liquefied bearing material came into contact with the axle and embrittled it. And within 2 or 3 seconds, it became what you saw in that Coke can thing. And I think anyone who owns plain bearings, me included, who look after diesel locomotives with traction motor suspension bearings right on the axle, have been really sort of heightened about that in a level of knowledge since this report has come out than we previously had. Any comments or questions about that?
I understood that the white metal itself, the melting temperature of that is relatively low. It's when the rest of the bearing and starts really heating up that the real problem starts.
Yeah,
correct. You're getting very high temperatures, and the copper and what have you that's in the metal itself starts to liquefy. Is really where it starts to get bad. So really, in some ways, the white metal melting is a warning that you've got a real problem on your hands and you should do something, you know.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been clearer about that. Yeah, so the white metal splattering that I saw back in 1988 should have been a flag, rather than everyone all stood around and said, "Oh, that's bad," you know, But yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the temperature in question for the melting of the brass is actually about 1,000 degrees Celsius. So it's really, really hot. So the sign of the lead coming out or lead smoke wafting around is a very critical warning there, and it really emphasises the need to be vigilant, especially in the context of mainline running, perhaps at passenger stops. Just cast your eyes in the general direction of where the bearings are. I know a lot of engine drivers or servicing people, especially in a heritage context, go up and bring their hand in the general vicinity of the bearing, and that will tell you if it's very hot or not. I think something that we also learned from the various reports that have been done is, in terms of the actual LME occurring, that's unlikely to occur while the bearing is still hot. It's something that sort of happens as it cools, because of course, once you inject a metal which is of a different construction into the axle, it will cool at a different rate. So what it really emphasizes is a really good control is checking the temperature of your bearing when you come to a stop. Of course, when it happened in the yard, that was after it had sort of gone down the line at 70 kilometers an hour, and it was actually in the yard as it was cooling down that the issue occurred. So I think that's also important for people to understand that if it's running hot and it stays hot, then obviously that's not very good. But when it really becomes dangerous is when you then go and you let it cool.
Thanks, Aaron. Yep. And again, that comes back to what I said when Paul Markham was speaking about at the beginning, is that what we're talking about now is things that some of us know. Many will be saying, yeah, I know that anyway, so duh, Aaron. And other people are going, oh, I'd like to know more about that. So maybe this is a flag up within your own internal self-review of your group to say, are we all over what Aaron just said? And does our safety case, our safety system, our documentation actually look at the risk that we have in our operation and address that?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, some of the things Aaron was talking about is if you're running every opportunity you get where the locomotive stops, it always pays to get out and just feel the axles. You can tell if they're getting hot, and if they are, you'll know about it. But that's really important because other than smelling the white metal when it's getting really hot, and I have never smelled it, but apparently it doesn't smell very nice.
That's
the other thing really to do is at regular intervals, when every opportunity when the locomotive stops, go out and just touch the axles, the bosses on the drivers, and just check to make sure that they are not, at some temperature you can't hold your hand on.
How much does a heat gun cost these days?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Very little.
Yeah.
I've got one, and you hold it in your little old hot hand and go around and check all the time. It's good.
Yeah, $30, and I think that's especially useful in the context of diesel electrics. Now, if properly maintained in terms of the tensioning of the wick and all the correct oils, I think it's mobile Delvac for the suspension bearings on an EMD. If you maintain that, they are very safe, and that's why when you bring something back into service after you've touched the bearing or changed the oil, it's not a bad idea to get a temperature gun and just check the temperature of that. They're not as easy to check as steam locomotives, but certainly the old hand method, if you can get close to the bearing, is perfectly adequate.
So the hand method is great for the steam locos and for the easy to reach bearings on the steam loco. If you took other plane bearings, then a heat gun is a good option. And again, this is just offered as have a think about it. There's no rules being introduced. The Heritage Technical Committee isn't about ruling, saying you should do things. But as a group, have a think about some processes that you have. Even if you're running on half a mile of a track, you're not probably at risk of having an axle failure and a derailment in the hot bearing when you running up and down between Morehouse and Ferrymead. But it's about care for your gear and making it last longer and noticing trends and changes. Yeah. And for a $30 investment in a heat gun, which is just for those that don't understand, it's just a simple device that you point at something and it tells you what the temperature of the thing that you're pointing at is on a readback screen on it. And if you have a simple chart, just a pen and paper on a clipboard, you can see sudden changes over time. And my group towed DF 1501 down from Auckland to Christchurch after it had been sitting at Pacific Scrap for 30, 40 years or so. And one of the biggest risks was the bearings, and they were roller bearings, they're not plain bearings, but one of the assurances we had, which allowed us to do that, was that at set intervals, we were out heat gunning those bearings, but not just heat gunning them, but recording them on a sheet, on a clipboard, so that we could suddenly see if one was rising above the rest and starting to spike. And if you run a small railway, then you've got some real-time data coming in that you can put to your maintenance team and say, oh, on our regular trip up between Waipara and Waikari, we've noticed that X number roller bearing on carriage number whatever was running 10 degrees above everything else on the whole thing. So you've got some great technology in the world now. The increased use of heat gun pointing and on a quick, simple table on a clipboard. We're not talking about avoiding disaster. We're just looking for things that may damage our precious gear in the future. So it's about data collection as you roll.
Hey, just Mike Anderson, just to let you know that
Hey, Stuart.
Felding's team have been doing it for a number of years with the WOB.
Yep.
Issues with the back bogey heating up. So we implemented that every stop, our team leader goes out and just checks the bearings. So
Yep.
that's our little assurance.
And
It's
that's
actually quite interesting how warm they actually get when they settle as well.
Yes. And that speaks to knowing your gear, doesn't it? It's like knowing what it's normally like. So therefore, once you know what it's normally like, you can suddenly discover when something's going astray. The
Biggest thing is probably want to point out is we did notice the temperatures getting up, but when they got up, they actually dropped down to a level and stayed there. So if you do check temperatures of bearings on that and you think, oh, shoot, that's getting up there a little bit, the next stop you check it, it drops down. So it's just an interesting little fact.
And also, is it uniformly or just across one particular?
Uniformly.
Yeah, okay, yep. So that's okay. If it's uniformly doing it, then there's something normal happening to every bearing. If you have one that's spiking, then you're going to be raising your eyebrows. Another thing, just before we move on from heat guns, is that if different people are doing it, if you have a small rail operation, it's just one person who's the guard, and he or she does that at the end of each trip and just walks along, that's fine. But if you have different people doing it, then you need a quality of data. So what our group have done is just used a simple dot of paint, a very simple, small, out of those pens that you can buy that dot paint on, and just these are the points you point the heat gun at. But particularly as a diesel electric group, we need to get someone to squat down on their knees and point in towards the traction motor suspension bearings and look at the traction motor armature bearings and a couple of other key points. Is that just have a code that you've worked out where you've dotted a simple bit of paint on something, so whoever's pointing a heat gun at something, they're always pointing it at the same place to get your data.
Just to put the bejesus into a few people, railways were classics. They had a water service which pointed water onto the affected bearing. Most of that stuff's been taken off locos these days. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's what railways did. And also they used the, I can't think of the name of it, the vegetable oil. Anybody know what it was called?
Canola, rapeseed.
No, it had another name. Similar, yeah. Probably do the trick, actually.
Rapeseed does. It's in the UK, there's a guy who uses rapeseed oil and steam oil in a 50-50 mix. So any bearings that are running warm, he uses that, and that gets them in.
Yeah, good, good, yeah. Yep. So what you're saying, Mike, is that, you know, all railways need to come up to speed, right?
Yeah.
So we can't just chuff around on a Saturday down at the little, you know, no.
You can, but forums like this aren't to make regulations and rules, Paul. This forum is about people just thinking about it for themselves.
Of course, my opinion is that eventually all railways will come under the same rules and regulations as mainline anyway.
Could do. But what you've got to remember, though, is that the requirements for NZR running our locomotives in their day was totally different now. 100 years later, that we're running the same gear, all right? You can't rely on what NZR did in the 1940s or the 50s. We have to think outside the square, because most of our steam locos are getting up to being over 100 years old now.
Yeah. However, in defence of that, I think that railways learned a few tricks over the years, and you know, they had many years of good experience. Okay, they had failures too, but you know, there's lots of things we can learn off that.
And Paul, this leads me to my last point of the meeting tonight, which I wanted, and thank you, we didn't arrange it, but you segued into it nicely, is that how the hell do we maintain this stuff as we have a body of knowledge that's getting older? One of the ways we can do it is keep having meetings like this, because as you all were warned when you came into this meeting's being recorded. So the things that you said tonight, Paul, the things that you said tonight, Dennis, and everyone else, are now going to go onto the HTC website as a video that people can download and watch. And I think that that's an important thing about what the value of FRONZ is in the digital era, is that we can now keep having meetings like this, keep talking about the things that concern us, keep talking about the solutions we can apply to problems, and we can digitize them and save them. No one in the heritage movement has the time to turn meetings like this into like Hansard from Parliament, or, you know, annotated notes of what we've said. But the more meetings we can have like this up and down the country, we've got 35 participants from up north down to Invercargill on this tonight talking about stuff. I think the more that we can capture the gems of things that people say, so that the next people who follow us can watch these videos and go, okay, you know, we've got no older senior members left. We're still running a steam loco or a diesel loco with plain bearings. We can listen and get the gems. Any reaction to that sort of approach?
You know, in a perfect world, we'd have an old guy who's, you know, done it for years and run successful brass bearings, and get him to go around different groups and just sit down in the workshop and show them a few things. You know, it'd be wonderful. But whether we can do that, I don't know.
One of the things I've found is that there's not a lot written down.
No.
And so because of that, everyone's on a learning curve from scratch, and we do rely on these people who've been around a while to find things out that you should really have been able to read about. So that to my mind is a bit of an issue. And in some ways that can be dealt with by starting to write your own procedures, where some of that stuff is dealt with, and people coming through the organisation can actually read information and say, that's something I need to look out for. They need to know the ins and outs of, say, bearings or whatever. It might be looking after motion on a locomotive or something like that. A lot of that stuff about taking up wedges, taking up cotters, there's not written down. You don't see that, which I found rather difficult. You have to go and learn it all.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going now. Have I shared my screen? Are you seeing my screen?
Just a load of darkness, mate.
Sorry?
Just a load of darkness, mate.
Okay, I'm going to new share. Hang on, here it comes now. Brilliant. Hopefully it's there. There we go. Okay, so can you see it now?
No.
Nothing at all from me?
No, it just says Mike Anderson has started screen sharing.
Okay, but you can't see the actual screen. That's brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to do it without sharing the screen. I'm going to go back to video and tell you it's very patchy and it's incredibly out of date, but we're working hard now, and thanks to the sponsorship that we've got from FRONZ and Kiwi Rail and Waka Kotahi, we're spending a bit of money now on updating the technical papers. So if you go to the HTC website and which is htc.kiwi, and go to the codes and standards page, you'll get a link into the FRONZ technical papers. And in there, for groups that are non-mainline operators, there's it's a gold mine of the old standard, the stuff that the old guys used to know, that Dennis was referring to. And I still find a lot of groups around the country didn't realise that was there for you as a resource. On how to do packing, on what flex tow is, a lot of the mystic stuff that's being talked about tonight. The rider it's low quality with document control, and there's a hell of a lot out of date, but we're now chucking a bit of money in to get it updated. But as a bare minimum, if you're a FRONZ member tonight and you haven't been to the technical papers page of the FRONZ website, which you can access through the HTC site, htc.kiwi, and click on codes and standards, hopefully that will help address some of the issues that Dennis just raised.
Yes, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Team, we're just entering the end of the meeting. Is there anything that is not by way of feedback about looking after plain bearings, but about the value of having gatherings like this in the future?
Yeah, it's all good, all good. Yeah, no, I thought it was going to be difficult getting into the bloody thing, but it's actually been quite easy. Thank you. You know, for technical people who are challenged like me.
Very good, actually. Yeah, I think it's a good forum, and these people can share things and what have you, which is really important because not everyone knows it all, and everyone has got something to learn, I think. One thing that I did want to mention in terms of the standards and codes is that I found the one of the issues with plain bearings that I've been dealing with the AB in particular is making sure that the code says you've got to have a particular type of trimming of flax toe, or sometimes they call it thrum, sometimes they call it something or other else. My understanding is that with that particular locomotive is flax toe is meant to be there. So my understanding is you've got to use that as the packing for the bearing. You shouldn't be using wool or anything like that. One of the issues I've struck recently is that trying to get flax toe is actually a problem. But we were able, with the AB we've got, that came from the Kingston Flyer and Russell Glendinning, I believe. But anyhow, what I was going to allude to is that I have actually found that we can get flax toe from Southland Flax Mill. It's a museum in Southland, and they can supply it if people need it. I've actually got some. We haven't actually tried putting in. I'm going to put it into the axle boxes when we've got one out at the moment. So we're going to look at putting that back in. It's a bit of a trick to get it in there, I think. It used to come from the stores branch in Kiwi on railway days, all ready to go into the axle box. There's 2 wads of it or skeins of it go into an AB axle box. So there's a bit of work to be done about how to pack it up and get it in so that it's in tight. That the flax toe remains always in contact with the bottom of the journal, because you're relying on that for that to keep things circulating. If you don't have it, then I guess you've got other problems to worry about. But just want to share with you that I have found there's a source of it, which I've got, but if you need it, I've found out where you can get it.
Thanks, Dennis. Seeing we're recording this and it's going to be broadcast, you just want to say the source out loud and then people can follow up.
It's the Southland Flax Museum in Riverton. I think the Templeton family run it, and it's one of these museums it's a working museum. They process flax, but they produce flax thread or fiber, and also flax toe. And you can contact them and they've sent me some samples. In fact, I've got about 3 kilograms of the stuff. And I'm going to start looking at putting it into the AB. Now, I don't know whether the fiber, which is the process thing, or the flax toe is the best. We haven't worked that out yet, but at least I know we can get it, because I was told up until recently you could no longer get that stuff.
There is or was a working flax museum at Foxton too, if that's any help to the North Islanders.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's running, because this company used to send their flax to Foxton for processing into, I guess, binder twine and mats and all sorts of stuff. But if it's not in Foxton, they're very helpful. They're on the web. You can get hold of them and call them and have a talk to them about it.
Thank you.
Actually, I just thought of something. You know, as you say, Dennis, you've got to have that bottom cellar. It's got to be tight up against the journal.
Yeah.
The C-class loco, I don't know if the K's had it or not, but the C-classes had a sprung-loaded tray underneath, and you put the hard grease on it, and it would constantly, be up against the journal. Yeah. And I thought that was a damn good idea. It worked very well.
Yeah. Well, the AB doesn't have that, of course. I imagine the A doesn't either.
You could fit it.
Yeah, you could. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Or in the UK, what they've done is some of them have felt, spring-loaded felts under the bottom of it. I think Severn Valley or North Yorkshire Moors make them, and you can fit them in the bottom of the.
Okay, so the important part is that the bottom of the journal's got something that it's pushing up against that can retain the oil.
Yes.
And circulate it.
So for if you guys want to find out more about those sorts of innovations, and thanks for mentioning that, David, for Severn Valley, we've got in New Zealand the general manager of the Bay of Islands Vintage Railway, Mike Bradshaw, is the ex-maintenance manager or engineering manager from Severn Valley. And he's a Pommy guy who is rail trade right from when he was an apprentice at Old Oak Common Depot with the steam locos back in the day on the Great Western Railway, as well as working at Bay of Islands Vintage Railway. He then, of course, went over and was engineering manager for Severn Valley. And then before he came back to New Zealand after that, he spent a stint in Argentina as an engineering manager on a very ancient rickety steam second grade line. He's now back in New Zealand, and he's one of our committee members on our Heritage Technical Committee. He's an absolute expert on bearings and this sort of stuff. So Mike Bradshaw, his email address is mikethesteam@hotmail.com. But anyone who is an operator of a small line, say like Ferrymead size thing, he's got incredible insight on how to do stuff efficiently to care for this gear without going over the top, but definitely knows the pitfalls of the dangers because he's managed it on the big time.
Actually, for South Island, of course he lives north, for South Islanders, Alex Hunter might be able to say what happened at, what was that funny little row he worked on?
Welsh Island and Festiniog.
Festiniog, that's the one.
Yeah. 1 foot 11 3/4 gauge.
Yeah. But they ran trains.
Yeah. So you want to say that out loud again, Paul, so people watching this in the future will find the name?
Alex Hunter.
Thank you.
At the Festiniog. Yeah, he worked at Festiniog. He's now in charge of the tramway, isn't he, David? Mechanical manager or?
Workshop manager, yep.
Christchurch Tramway.
So it can be contracted at Christchurch Tramway. Cool.
Yes.
Right. Okay, we're drawing to the end. I think it's been a really productive meeting, not just for the technical content, but for the connections we've made and the things we've shared. And as I said, it will live forever on the internet, so people who come after us will be able to find out the things that we've talked about. I'm going to get Grant Craig. Are you there, Grant Craig?
Probably getting a glass of wine.
I'm just giving you the heads up while you're pouring your wine. I'm going to get Grant to finish, but I just wanted to say before we finish that I tend to spend most of my heritage time at the moment around the HTC. So it's really cool to break out of that and have something to do with the wider FRONZ membership again. So thank you all. We've been up to 38 participants tonight, which is pretty cool. And it just reminds me that in New Zealand, we're really lucky. Most other countries don't have a high functioning thing like FRONZ, which brings people together like this, shares the information. New Zealand really kicks it out of the park on this sort of stuff. So thank you. And my last big recognition and ngā mihi nui is to Mainline Steam Heritage Trust for being that group who, as Grant said at the introduction, is share your shit, don't hide it. These guys have paid several $1,000s for these reports that have been shared with you. The metallurgist report was a lot of money. The other one was a lot of money. But they've done the thing in the interests of being a team player. So, Grant, I'll hand over to you to close. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mike. And I really appreciate everybody coming tonight. And you'll never know if this is coffee or wine.
I know what's in it, Charlie.
So I'm not that mechanically minded, but I found it very interesting tonight, and I would like to carry these things on. We're finding, with 35 here taking an interest of what's going on, we should be doing more of this stuff. So part of what we're doing in the FRONZ executive is coming up with topics that we can bring up, and we'll try and do this once a month or something like that to carry on. So again, I'd like to thank Mainline Steam. I'd like to thank Mike from the HTC, and all you guys for attending. So thank you very, very much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
I've got one other thing too. the FRONZ conference in Invercargill next year. We'd like as many people to attend. We've got a good calendar of what we're going to talk about, a few extra people of interest, especially when it comes to environmental stuff that we're going to discuss. And we haven't had a conference in Invercargill before, so it'll be a really good place to go and have a look around it. So if everybody can sort of make plans to come, that'd be really good. So thank you very, very much, guys and ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye. See ya.